7 Amish kids vanished without a trace. If you're tired of mystery channels that promise answers but leave you hanging, this case will haunt you differently. Why did the Amish community initially refuse outside help? What made seasoned investigators abandon the search after just weeks? And why did those search dogs react so violently when they finally returned to that forest? Because what they discovered, buried beneath those autumn leaves, changes everything we thought we knew about that September morning. Before we dive in, comment below and tell me where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see how far these stories reach. September 15th, 1987. A crisp autumn morning in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. The Amish community of intercourse was preparing for another peaceful day. Children were doing their morning chores before school. Parents were milking cows and feeding chickens. Everything seemed normal. But by sunset, 7 children would be missing. And what happened next would shake this quiet community to its core. The Stoltzfus family farm sat at the edge of Miller's Woods, a place where Amish children had played safely for generations. That morning, 7 kids between ages 6 and 12 walked into those woods to collect berries for their mothers. They never came back. No screams, no signs of struggle. Just gone. Like the earth had swallowed them whole. But what the search dogs would find 10 years later would prove that sometimes the truth is far more disturbing than anyone could imagine. Let me tell you about these 7 innocent souls. Mary Stoltzfus, age 12, the oldest of the group. She was known for her bright smile and helping hand. Her younger brother Jacob, age 10, always followed wherever Mary led. Then there was little Sarah Miller, just 6 years old. Her pigtails bounced when she walked, and she collected wildflowers everywhere she went. The Beeler twins, Ruth and Rebecca, age 8, were inseparable. They did everything together, even finishing each other's sentences. Samuel Fisher, age 9, was the quiet one. He loved animals and could whistle any bird song. And finally there was young David Yoder, age 7, who had the biggest imagination of them all. 7 beautiful children with their whole lives ahead of them, 7 families who would never be the same. But what happened in those woods that September morning would remain a mystery for exactly 10 years. The morning started like any other. Mrs. Stoltzfus was kneading bread dough when Mary asked if she could take the children berry picking. The blackberries were ripe, and they needed them for the church social that weekend. "Stay together," she called after them, "and be back before lunch." Those were the last words she ever spoke to her daughter. The children carried small wicker baskets and wore their best Sunday clothes. They were excited about the adventure. Neighbors later said they could hear their laughter echoing from the woods. At 11:30 a.m., Mrs. Beeler went to check on them. The berries were perfectly ripe, hanging heavy on the bushes, but the baskets lay scattered on the ground, empty. And the children? Nowhere to be found. What she discovered next would send chills down every parent's spine in that community. Mrs. Beeler's heart pounded as she picked up the abandoned baskets. Mary's blue bonnet hung from a low branch, as if it had been caught while running. But there were no footprints leading away, no broken branches, no signs of where they had gone. She called their names. Her voice echoed through the trees, but only silence answered back. That's when she noticed something strange. The birds had stopped singing. The woods were completely quiet, like nature itself was holding its breath. Mrs. Beeler ran back to the settlement, her long dress catching on brambles. "The children!" she gasped to the first person she saw. "They're gone!" Within minutes, every able-bodied adult in the community was searching those woods. But what they found instead of children would make some of them question everything they believed about their safe, peaceful world, because this was just the beginning of a mystery that would haunt them for decades. The Amish community moved like a well-oiled machine. Fathers left their fields, mothers left their kitchens. Even the elderly joined the search, walking slowly but determined through every inch of Miller's Woods. They called the children's names until their voices were hoarse. They searched until their feet bled. They looked under every fallen log, behind every boulder, in every possible hiding spot. But it was as if the 7 children had simply vanished into thin air. As the sun began to set, panic crept into their hearts. Amish children didn't run away. They didn't wander off without permission. They were raised to be obedient and careful. So where were they? Some searchers began to whisper about things they'd rather not think about dangers that might lurk in woods they'd always considered safe. But the real truth about what happened to those children was far more disturbing than any of their worst fears. As darkness swallowed the forest, the temperature dropped. 7 children, some as young as 6, were somewhere out there in the cold. The thought terrified every parent in the community. They lit lanterns and continued searching through the night. Shadows danced between the trees, playing tricks on tired eyes. Every rustle of leaves made hearts jump with hope, then sink with disappointment. By midnight, they had covered every square foot of Miller's Woods twice. Still nothing. The mothers sat together in the Stoltzfus kitchen, clutching cups of cold coffee and fighting back tears. The fathers stood in the yard, their faces grim in the lantern light. Someone finally spoke the words everyone was thinking. We need outside help. But what happened next would shock the entire community, because the decision about whether to involve outsiders would tear their tight-knit community apart and delay the search for precious hours. The Amish have always been a private people. They solve their own problems. They take care of their own. They don't trust outsiders with their business. But 7 missing children changed everything. Elder Samuel Stoltzfus, Mary's grandfather, stood firm. We handle this ourselves, he declared. God will provide. But Jacob Miller, little Sarah's father, disagreed. My daughter is out there somewhere, he said, his voice breaking. I don't care about our ways if it means finding her. The argument that followed would split families and friendships. Some believed that involving English authorities would bring shame upon their community. Others believed that pride was less important than finding their children. As the hours ticked by, the divide grew deeper, and while they argued, 7 children remained missing. What they didn't know was that their decision would have consequences that would haunt them for the next 10 years. And the real reason for their refusal to seek help was darker than anyone imagined. Here's what the community didn't want outsiders to know. 3 months before the children disappeared, there had been another incident in Miller's Woods. A traveling merchant had gone missing near the same area. His wagon was found abandoned, his horses wandering free. But the man himself was never seen again. The Amish community had found something in those woods, something that made them bury the merchant's belongings and pretend he never existed. Elder Stoltzfus knew that bringing in outside investigators would mean revealing their secret. And some secrets, he believed, were worth keeping, even if it meant risking the children's lives. But what was in those woods that scared them so much? What had they found that was worth protecting, even when 7 innocent children were missing? The answer would shock even the most experienced investigators when they finally learned the truth 10 years later. Elder Stoltzfus gathered the men in the barn that night. We must be careful, he whispered. If outsiders come, they will ask questions we cannot answer. He reminded them of their find 3 months earlier, the strange markings on trees, the disturbed earth, the items that didn't belong to any merchant. We buried those things for a reason, he said. Some knowledge is too dangerous to share. The men nodded, understanding. They had all seen what was hidden in those woods. They had all agreed to keep it secret. But now, with 7 children missing, that secret felt like a weight crushing their souls. The children matter more than our secrets, Jacob Miller pleaded. But Elder Stoltzfus shook his head. If we reveal what we know, we put the entire community at risk. What they had discovered was something that could destroy everything they held dear. But was it worth 7 young lives? By dawn, the decision was made. No outside help. The community would handle this alone. Jacob Miller wept as he agreed to the elders' demands. His daughter Sarah was somewhere out there, possibly hurt, possibly worse. But the alternative, revealing their secret, was unthinkable. They spent another full day searching. Women brought food and water, men worked in shifts, children were kept close to home. But as the second night fell, hope began to fade. The mothers couldn't stop crying. The fathers couldn't meet each other's eyes. 7 families were falling apart, and the community was paralyzed by their own silence. Finally, on the third day, when even the most stubborn elders realized they had no choice, they made the call. But those precious 72 hours of delay would haunt them forever, and the investigators who arrived would soon discover that this delay was the least of their problems. Detective James Morrison had seen it all in his 20 years on the force: missing persons, kidnappings, runaways. But when he arrived at the Amish settlement, something felt different. The community was polite but distant. They answered questions with single words. They avoided eye contact. They were clearly hiding something. "When exactly did you call us?" Morrison asked. The silence that followed spoke volumes. 3 days. 3 precious days when the trail should have been fresh, when witnesses should have been interviewed, when evidence should have been collected. Morrison's partner, Detective Sarah Chen, shook her head in disbelief. 3 days, she muttered. The first 48 hours are everything in a missing persons case. But what bothered Morrison most wasn't the delay. It was the fear he saw in their eyes. These people weren't just worried about their missing children. They were terrified of something else entirely. Morrison and Chen set up their command post in the community center. Maps were spread across tables. Search grids were drawn. Radio communications were established. The first step was interviewing witnesses, but getting the Amish to talk was like pulling teeth. "The children went berry picking," they said. "They never came back." That was it. No details. No observations. No theories. Chen interviewed Mrs. Beeler, who had found the abandoned baskets. "Was there anything unusual about the scene?" she asked. Mrs. Beeler hesitated, then shook her head. But Chen noticed the hesitation. "Are you sure? Anything at all that seemed out of place?" Mrs. Beeler's hands trembled as she folded her apron. "Just the silence," she whispered. "The woods were too quiet, like something had scared all the animals away." That was the first real clue. But it would be far from the last disturbing detail they would uncover. On day 4, the K-9 unit arrived. 3 German shepherds and their handlers, all experienced in search and rescue operations. The dogs were given clothing from each missing child to catch their scent. Then they were led to the berry patch where the baskets had been found. What happened next puzzled everyone. The dogs picked up the children's scent immediately. Their tails wagged, their noses worked frantically. They were on the trail, but after just 50 yards, they stopped. All 3 dogs, at exactly the same spot, began to whine and back away. Their handlers had never seen anything like it. These were dogs trained to track through any terrain, in any weather. They had found lost hikers, escaped prisoners, even bodies in advanced stages of decomposition. But whatever they sensed in Miller's woods made them refuse to go further. The handlers tried everything, but the dogs would not budge. It was as if they had hit an invisible wall of terror. Handler Mike Stevens had worked with Rex, his German shepherd, for 6 years. They had never failed to complete a search. Rex was fearless, determined, and absolutely reliable. But in Miller's woods, Rex was acting like a completely different dog. "He's terrified," Stevens told Morrison. "I've never seen him like this." The other 2 dogs showed the same behavior, cowering, whimpering, trying to pull their handlers away from the search area. "Maybe there's a wild animal," Chen suggested. "A bear or something that's scaring them." Stevens shook his head. "These dogs are trained to track through bear territory. This is something else." They tried a different approach, starting from various points around the woods. But every single time, the dogs would track for a short distance, then stop at seemingly random spots and refuse to continue. It was as if the entire forest was contaminated with something that filled them with dread, something that even trained search animals couldn't face. Dr. Angela Foster, a specialist in canine behavior, was called in. She had studied search dog reactions for over a decade and had never encountered anything like this. "The dogs are picking up the children's scent," she explained to the frustrated search team. "But they're also detecting something else, something that triggers their deepest survival instincts." She ran tests on the dogs' stress levels. All three showed extreme anxiety responses. "Whatever they're sensing, it's something their brains interpret as a mortal threat," Foster continued. "It's overriding their training completely." Morrison was getting desperate. "Can we work around it somehow?" Foster shook her head. "Forcing them could cause permanent psychological damage. These dogs are telling us something important." But what were they trying to communicate? What invisible danger lurked in Miller's woods that could terrify even the bravest search animals? The answer would remain hidden for 10 more years, buried beneath layers of secrets and lies. Without the dogs, the search became a manual operation. Morrison called in additional officers, forest rangers, and volunteer searchers. Within days, over 200 people were combing through Miller's woods. They used metal detectors, ground-penetrating radar, and thermal imaging equipment. Every inch of the forest was systematically searched, but the woods seemed to swallow their efforts. Searchers reported feeling watched, hearing whispers in the wind, and finding strange symbols carved into tree bark. "This place gives me the creeps," one volunteer muttered. Others nodded in agreement. The Amish community watched from a distance, their faces filled with guilt and terror. They knew something the searchers didn't. They had seen those symbols before. They had found items that didn't belong to any merchant. But they remained silent, bound by their elders' commands and their own fear. Meanwhile, 7 families continued their agonizing wait, not knowing if their children were alive or dead. By the second week, the story had exploded in the media. 7 Amish children vanish without a trace, screamed headlines across the country. News vans lined the roads leading to the settlement. Reporters tried to interview anyone who would talk. The Amish community was horrified. Their private tragedy had become public entertainment. Cameras followed their every move. Reporters speculated wildly about what might have happened to the children. Some suggested kidnapping rings. Others proposed supernatural explanations. A few even blamed the Amish parents for not watching their children closely enough. The families of the missing children were trapped in their own homes, unable to grieve in peace. Elder Stoltzfus gathered the community leaders. "This is exactly what we feared," he said. "Now the whole world is watching. We must be even more careful about what we reveal." But the pressure was mounting. How long could they keep their secret when the entire nation was demanding answers? The tip line was flooded with calls. People claimed to have seen the children in different states. Others reported suspicious vehicles near Amish communities. Morrison and his team followed every lead, no matter how unlikely. A trucker swore he saw 7 Amish children at a rest stop in Ohio. A family in Virginia claimed the kids were living with a mysterious couple. A psychic from California insisted the children were being held in an underground bunker. Each lead required investigation. Each investigation took time and resources. Each false hope crushed the families a little more. "We're chasing ghosts," Chen told Morrison after their 15th dead end. But Morrison refused to give up. Somewhere out there, 7 children were depending on them. What he didn't know was that the real clues were right under their noses, hidden in the one place they weren't allowed to look. The Amish community's deepest, darkest secret was about to claim 7 more victims. And the clock was ticking faster than anyone realized. 3 weeks in, the investigation was losing momentum. The physical evidence was minimal. The witness statements were vague. The search dogs remained useless. Morrison's superiors were pressuring him for results. "We've got media attention, federal involvement, and political pressure," his captain explained. "We need answers, or we need to start scaling back." But how do you scale back when 7 children are missing? The families were falling apart. Mrs. Stoltzfus hadn't eaten in days. Mr. Miller couldn't sleep. The other parents moved through their daily routines like ghosts. Maybe they're not in the woods anymore, Chen suggested. Maybe someone took them somewhere else. It was a logical theory. But Morrison couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something crucial, something the Amish community wasn't telling them. He decided to push harder, to ask more direct questions. What he discovered would change everything about the case, and it would reveal why seasoned investigators would eventually abandon their search. Morrison cornered Elder Stoltzfus in the settlement's meeting house. "I know you're hiding something," he said bluntly, "and I think it's connected to these missing children." The old man's face went pale. "We are a private people," Stoltzfus replied. "We do not involve ourselves in worldly matters." "7 children are missing," Morrison shouted. "This isn't about your privacy anymore." That's when Stoltzfus broke. "You don't understand," he whispered. "There are things in these woods that should stay buried. Things that would destroy not just our community, but anyone who learns the truth." Morrison leaned forward. "What kind of things?" Stoltzfus looked around nervously, then spoke in barely audible words. 3 months ago we found something. Something that proves our worst fears about what lives in Miller's woods. We tried to handle it ourselves. We thought we could contain it, but now it has our children. Elder Stoltzfus led Morrison to a hidden root cellar behind the meeting house. His hands shook as he lifted the heavy wooden door. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were items that made Morrison's blood run cold. Human bones. But not just any bones. These had been carved with strange symbols, arranged in ritual patterns, and stained with something dark and dried. "The merchant," Stoltzfus whispered. "We found him like this in the woods, but he wasn't alone." Morrison stared at the evidence. "Why didn't you report this?" "Because there were more," the elder replied. "Many more, all arranged the same way, all bearing the same marks." Morrison's mind raced. "How many?" 17 that we found, but we stopped looking when we realized what we were dealing with. Someone has been using Miller's woods as a killing ground for years, maybe decades, and now they have our children. The full horror of the situation was finally becoming clear. Morrison immediately called in the FBI. The symbols on the bones matched patterns associated with ritual killings. Agent Patricia Wells, a specialist in cult crimes, arrived within hours. "This is the work of an organized group," she confirmed. "These symbols are ancient, but they're still used by certain extremist cults today." The investigation took a horrifying new direction. Miller's Woods wasn't just a dumping ground. It was a sacred site for people who believed in human sacrifice. "The children weren't randomly taken," Wells explained. "They were specifically chosen for some kind of ritual." Morrison felt sick. "How long do we have?" Wells looked at the calendar. "If this follows traditional patterns, the autumn equinox would be significant. That's in 10 days. 10 days to find 7 children before they became victims of an ancient evil. But the cult had been operating in these woods for decades. They knew every hiding place, every secret path, and they had a 10-day head start. The search became a race against time. FBI agents, state police, and local officers flooded the area. They brought in helicopters, ground-penetrating radar, and thermal imaging equipment. Every abandoned building, every cave, every possible hiding spot within a 50-mile radius was searched. But the cult members seemed to have vanished as completely as the children. "They know we're coming," Wells told Morrison. "They've probably moved the children to a secondary location." The autumn equinox was 6 days away. Roadblocks were set up. Airports were monitored. Every person entering or leaving the area was questioned. The media coverage intensified. 7 Amish children targeted by death cult became the story that dominated every news channel. But despite the massive effort, despite the hundreds of searchers, despite the advanced technology, they were no closer to finding the children. And time was running out faster than anyone dared to admit. The cult had been planning this for months. Every detail had been calculated. Every escape route had been prepared. Dr. Marcus Reed, a criminal profiler, studied the case files. "This group is highly organized," he concluded. "They've been operating here for years without detection." He spread crime scene photos across the table. The ritual arrangements, the symbol patterns, the timing, everything suggests a leader with extensive knowledge of occult practices. Morrison studied the photos. "Someone local." "Has to be," Reed replied. "They know these woods intimately. They understand the Amish community's reluctance to involve outsiders. They've been watching, waiting, planning." "The merchant was probably a test run," Reed continued. "They were perfecting their methods, preparing for something bigger." 7 children, Morrison said grimly. 7 is a sacred number in many occult traditions, Reed confirmed. "This isn't random violence. It's a carefully orchestrated ritual that's been years in the making." The autumn equinox was 4 days away, and somewhere in the darkness, 7 innocent children were waiting for a rescue that might never come. With 3 days left, the search became frantic. Teams worked around the clock. Every lead was followed, no matter how unlikely. A psychic claimed to see the children in a barn with a red roof. Over 200 barns with red roofs were searched in a single day. A hiker reported strange chanting coming from a cave system 20 miles away. Spelunkers rappelled into every cave in the region. Each search yielded nothing. The families of the missing children gathered at the Stoltzfus farm. They prayed together, cried together, and held on to hope that was growing thinner by the hour. "Where are our babies?" Mrs. Miller sobbed. No one had an answer. The investigators were exhausted. The search dogs were still refusing to work. The media was speculating about the worst possible outcomes. And somewhere in the darkness, a cult was preparing for a ritual that would shock the world. 2 days remained. September 21st, 1987, the autumn equinox. If the profiler was right, this was the day the cult had been waiting for. Morrison hadn't slept in 72 hours. Every available officer was in the field. Helicopters circled overhead. Search teams combed through areas they had already searched multiple times. At sunrise, Mrs. Stoltzfus collapsed while hanging laundry. The strain of losing her daughter and granddaughter was too much. She was rushed to the hospital, mumbling Mary's name over and over. By noon, the media was reporting that authorities expected to find bodies, not survivors. By evening, the official search was called off. "We've done everything humanly possible," Morrison's captain announced. But Morrison refused to give up. He spent the night walking through Miller's woods alone, calling the children's names into the darkness. No one answered. 7 children had vanished without a trace, and the case that had consumed him for a month was officially closed. The investigation continued sporadically for months, but without new leads, without evidence, without any trace of the missing children, it became a cold case. Morrison was transferred to another department. Chen left police work entirely, traumatized by the failure to save the children. The Amish community never recovered. Families moved away. The settlement that had existed for over a century began to crumble. Miller's Woods was declared off-limits. No one went berry-picking there anymore. No children played in those trees. The families of the missing children held memorial services, but there were no bodies to bury. 7 empty graves stood in the community cemetery, marked only with wooden crosses and dates of birth. The dates of death remained blank. Years passed. The story faded from the news. People forgot about the 7 Amish children who had vanished without a trace. But Miller's Woods remembered, and it was keeping their secrets buried deep beneath the forest floor, 10 years after the disappearance. The world had moved on, but the families never did. Mrs. Stoltzfus was now in her 70s, her hair completely white from grief. Mr. Miller had become a broken man who rarely spoke. The other families had scattered, unable to bear the constant reminders of their lost children. Miller's Woods had grown wild and thick. Vines covered the old paths. Trees had fallen across the clearings. Nature was reclaiming the place where 7 children had vanished. The few remaining Amish families avoided the area completely. But on September 15, 1997, exactly 10 years after the disappearance, something changed. A new police chief arrived in Lancaster County. Chief Robert Martinez was young, ambitious, and determined to solve cold cases. He had read about the missing Amish children and was convinced the case could still be solved. What he didn't know was that Miller's Woods was about to reveal its secrets. Chief Martinez reopened the case file. Boxes of evidence, witness statements, and crime scene photos filled his office. He studied every detail, looking for clues the original investigators might have missed. One thing puzzled him immediately. Why had the search dogs refused to work? In his experience, dogs only reacted that way to specific scents. Chemical contamination, decomposition, or extreme fear pheromones. He decided to try again with fresh dogs and new handlers. Dr. Angela Foster, now retired, agreed to consult on the case. Those dogs detected something terrifying, she reminded him. Something that overrode years of training. Martinez nodded. But 10 years have passed. Maybe whatever scared them is gone now. Foster looked skeptical. Some things don't just disappear, she warned. But Martinez was determined. He scheduled a new search for the following week. He had no idea he was about to disturb something that had been waiting patiently for exactly 10 years. October 3rd, 1997. Chief Martinez stood at the edge of Miller's Woods with 2 new search dogs and their handlers. The forest looked different after 10 years. Wilder, darker, more forbidding. "Are you sure about this?" asked handler Lisa Thompson. Her golden retriever, Buddy, was trained in cadaver detection. The other dog, a German shepherd named Duke, specialized in tracking living scents. Martinez nodded. "We're going to find out what happened to those children." They entered the woods at the same spot where the children had gone berry picking. For the first few minutes, everything seemed normal. The dogs sniffed around, exploring the underbrush. Then Buddy stopped. His tail went rigid, his ears perked up. He had found something that had been waiting in Miller's Woods for exactly 10 years. And what he led them to would change everything they thought they knew about the case. Buddy began digging frantically at the base of an old oak tree. His paws threw dirt and leaves in all directions. "Easy, boy," Thompson called, but the dog wouldn't stop. Within minutes, he had uncovered something white. Martinez knelt down and carefully brushed away the soil. It was fabric, small, torn, and stained with age. "It's part of a dress," Thompson observed, "a child's dress." Martinez's heart pounded. They had found the first physical evidence in 10 years. But as they continued to dig, they found more. Pieces of clothing from different children. A small black shoe that could have belonged to little Sarah Miller. A torn suspender that might have been Jacob Stoltzfus's. 7 children's worth of clothing, buried in a shallow grave. But where were the children themselves? That question would soon be answered in the most disturbing way possible. Martinez called in the county forensic team. Within hours, Miller's Woods was crawling with investigators again. Dr. Sarah Kim, the chief medical examiner, supervised the excavation. "This is definitely a burial site," she confirmed. "But it's strange." "Strange how?" Martinez asked. "The clothes are arranged in a specific pattern," Kim explained, "like they were placed here ceremonially, not just discarded." The team worked carefully, photographing every item before removing it. Each piece of clothing told a story. Mary's blue dress, torn at the shoulder, Samuel's black pants with what looked like rope burns, Ruth's white apron, stained with something dark, but still no bodies. "Where are the children?" Martinez wondered aloud. Dr. Kim looked troubled. "I'm beginning to think they might not be here at all," she said quietly. "I think this burial site is meant to tell us something else entirely." As the forensic team continued their work, a disturbing pattern emerged. The clothing wasn't just buried randomly, it was arranged in a perfect circle, with each child's items positioned at specific points. Dr. Kim called in a specialist in ritual crimes. Professor Janet Mitchell from the university studied the arrangement. "This is a message," she concluded. "The cult is telling us they completed their ritual." Martinez felt sick. "You mean the children are—" "Not necessarily," Mitchell interrupted. "In some traditions, the removal of clothing represents rebirth or transformation." "So they could still be alive?" Mitchell hesitated. "It's possible, but they would be very different from the children who disappeared 10 years ago." "What do you mean?" "If they survived the ritual, they would have been changed, indoctrinated, made into something else entirely." The implications were horrifying. Martinez expanded the search area around the burial site. If the children had survived, there might be other clues nearby. The search dogs were brought back, and this time they were more cooperative. Duke, the tracking dog, picked up a scent trail leading deeper into the woods. The trail was old, very old, but still detectable. It led to a clearing that hadn't been searched in the original investigation. In the center of the clearing stood a circle of stones. Each stone was carved with the same symbols they had found on the merchant's bones 10 years earlier. This is where it happened, Martinez realized. This is where the ritual took place. But the clearing held more secrets. Ground-penetrating radar revealed multiple underground chambers. "There's a whole network down there," the technician reported. "Tunnels, rooms, maybe even living spaces." Martinez stared at the equipment readings. The cult hadn't just used Miller's Woods for rituals. They had built an entire underground complex. The entrance to the underground complex was hidden beneath a fallen log. Martinez and his team descended into darkness, their flashlights cutting through air that hadn't been disturbed in years. The tunnels were hand-carved, supported by ancient wooden beams. "This has been here for decades," the structural engineer confirmed. They found living quarters, storage rooms, and ritual chambers. But it was the final chamber that revealed the truth about the search dog's reaction. The walls were covered in symbols, painted in what looked like dried blood. In the center of the room sat 7 small cages, empty now, but clearly designed to hold children. The dogs could smell the fear, Martinez realized. 10 years later, they could still smell the terror those children experienced down here. The scent of pure primal fear had soaked into the very walls of the chamber. It was so intense that even a decade later it could drive trained search dogs away in panic. But the most disturbing discovery was yet to come. In the deepest chamber, Martinez found a journal. Written in cramped handwriting, it detailed the cult's activities over the past 20 years. The 7 Amish children were not their first victims. They were the culmination of decades of ritualistic kidnapping and murder. "They took people regularly," Martinez read aloud. "Travelers, runaways, anyone who wouldn't be missed immediately." The journal described how they had perfected their methods over the years, how they had learned to terrify their victims so completely that even the memory of their fear would linger for years. But the entry about the Amish children was different. "The 7 innocents will complete the great work," it read. "Their pure souls will open the gateway to eternal darkness." Martinez felt his blood run cold. The cult hadn't just killed these children. They had used them in some kind of supernatural ritual. And according to the journal, it had worked. The final pages of the journal described something that defied belief. The cult leader claimed they had opened a gateway to another dimension. "The children passed through willingly in the end," the journal stated. "Their terror transformed into acceptance. Their souls now serve a higher purpose." Martinez didn't believe in supernatural nonsense, but he couldn't ignore the evidence around him. The ritual chamber showed signs of extreme heat, as if something had burned there with impossible intensity. The walls were scorched in patterns that matched the symbols. And in the center of the room, where the journal claimed the gateway had opened, the stone floor was melted like it had been exposed to temperatures found in the core of the earth. No human technology could do this, the forensic expert confirmed. Whatever happened here, it generated heat beyond anything we understand. The search dogs' reaction finally made sense. They weren't just smelling fear, they were sensing something otherworldly. Martinez assembled all the evidence: the clothing burial site, the underground complex, the ritual chamber, the journal. Everything pointed to a horrifying conclusion. The 7 Amish children had been sacrificed in a ritual designed to open a supernatural gateway. Whether anyone believed in such things or not, the cult had believed in it completely, and their belief had led them to torture and murder 7 innocent children. The journal's final entry was dated September 21st, 1987, the day the children were supposed to have been found. "The gateway is open," it read. "Our work here is complete. We go now to prepare for the final phase." The cult had vanished after completing their ritual, but they had left behind evidence of their crimes and a warning. "Others will come," the journal concluded. "The gateway must remain protected. The children's sacrifice must not be in vain." Martinez realized that the cult might still be active, still protecting their so-called gateway. Armed with new evidence, Martinez reopened the investigation as a homicide case. The FBI was called in again, this time with a clear picture of what had happened. Using the journal, they identified several cult members who were still alive. Arrests were made across 3 states. Thomas Blackwood, the cult leader, was found living under a false identity in Oregon. When confronted with the evidence, he showed no remorse. "You cannot stop what we have started," he told investigators. "The children chose their fate. They are part of something greater now." The trials that followed would shock the nation. Details of the cult's activities, their underground complex, and their belief in supernatural gateways dominated headlines. 7 families finally learned the fate of their children. It wasn't the closure they had hoped for, but it was the truth. The 7 Amish children had died as victims of human evil, disguised as religious belief. But their story would serve as a warning to others. Today, Miller's Woods remains closed to the public. The underground complex was sealed with concrete, and the entire area was declared a crime scene in perpetuity. The families of the 7 children finally held proper funerals, laying empty coffins to rest in the community cemetery. Mrs. Stoltzfus died peacefully in her sleep, 6 months after learning the truth about her daughter and granddaughter. The other families found what peace they could in knowing their children's fate. Chief Martinez went on to solve several other cold cases, but he never forgot the 7 Amish children. The case changed how law enforcement handles missing persons cases involving isolated communities. It proved that some secrets are too dangerous to keep, no matter how much a community wants to protect itself. And it showed that evil can hide in the most unexpected places, wearing the mask of religious devotion. The 7 children of Miller's Woods will never be forgotten. Their story serves as a reminder that sometimes the most disturbing truths are the ones we're most afraid to face. This chilling true crime disappearance proves that some missing person cases hide darker secrets than we can imagine. The 7 Amish children who vanished without a trace in 1987 became one of the most disturbing unsolved mysteries in American history. Their story reminds us that behind every cold case file's entry lies a family's worst nightmare. When people disappeared without explanation, entire communities are forever changed. This suspenseful missing person story shows how real-life mysteries can be more terrifying than fiction. The mysterious disappearances that haunt us most are those where innocent lives vanish into darkness, leaving only questions and the desperate hope that somewhere, somehow, the truth will finally emerge from the shadows of time.